we were going to have like a little bit of footage. Louis and Eden had on one camera, and Hugh and Fiona had on another. So you got a couple of starts in, and then I'm not going to tell you everything about starting because I think most people know a lot of it, but I'll just cover a few of the points which I think are different about like what I do in a 800 compared to what I might do in another boat in terms of how I think about starting. So, Louis, is this your first time helming? And Eden only learnt to helm with, didn't you learn to sail like trapezing? That's what Joe was saying.
Yeah, I learnt to sail in lockdown, and my girlfriend taught me in a 14
Yeah. Well, very brave these guys stick on a camera, so thanks very much for that. And we won't show the capsize out in the start. I mean, we absolutely will, but we won't show it straight away. So that's actually some really good stuff here. So mostly sitting with a little bit of windward heel, which always helps. I always think if you get a bit of leeward heel on, then you'll tend to round up, and then you'll be fighting it by pulling the jib on, and then you end up sailing forward. Obviously positioning a little bit far back from the line, but one thing I'll touch on later though, that first race. So we helpfully get a really good shot of the other boat starting, which is nice of you to oblige us. And I think like it's an okay trigger. It's just time on distance. Obviously, the first time that you've been in the boat doing it. What some of the good points is a swap over from helm having the main sheet to the crew having it. I'm not sure if you talked about that before.
Yeah, we had a little chat, but that's how we do it.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to do the same and like mostly take the main sheet for most of the pre-start. So if there's any like manoeuvring to be done, like we need to do a double tack or, you know, do a big bear way and, you know, move down into the sub, I find it's kind of easy to do that as a helm with the main sheet. I think back in the day, we used to have the helm having the jib for quite a long time, but sometimes it gets annoying if you then have to do tacks because it's loose and you're getting out and then you uncleat it and blah, blah. So I think having like the helm with the main sheet for quite a long time is good. And I tend to take it out on the wire, then pass it up to Guy. The other thing I really like about this is how Louis got hooked on quite early and like get hooked on and just squatted down in the boat. And you can always sometimes put my forward hand inside my trapeze wire so I can just push the trapeze wire out to the side to take up a bit of the slap so I can stay low. And then obviously as you go out, you can just do the rest of the sheeting, then just pass the main sheet to Guy once we're at full chat and both out. So actually some really good stuff. You know, timing could be better, but you guys know that, so it's kind of obvious stuff. The other thing to talk about is it's hard to tell, obviously we can't see the leach of your sail, but actually 1244, which I think is who is that? It's Fred, yeah. So the only thing I would say is like it looks like you got quite a lot of kicker off. And it's a really fine balance. So what we tend to do is not pull on, we have the kicker almost totally off until about 20 seconds to go and we're very sure of our spot, and then we pull the kicker on. Obviously if you pull the kicker on too early, then either you get stuck head to wind or you end up actually sailing forward because it stiffens up the leach and you just kind of move forward. So that's quite good, but I would pull on a little bit. It doesn't have to be upwind setting. We probably go to like 80%. But just something that you can sail happily for about, 10, 20 boat lengths off the line before your crew goes in or your helm goes in and gets the rest.
Even if it's enough so you don't get rolled off the line.
Yeah.
Because then you just instantly somewhere.
And actually you probably don't need the amount of kicker that you would up a beat for the start. Anyway, it's quite nice to have a bit of a twist for the acceleration and probably a bit more depth. But there it's completely off. So I'm not sure if it come on cleated or what, but obviously you can see the booms. It just
just got buried and was hard to get up.
Okay. There's a kind of like a level of priorities, and getting on the front row is always kind of like probably more important than the perfect kicker setting. So I mean, and you're there on the front row, so yeah, it's kind of fine, but just as a pointer. But otherwise. otherwise good. And then you guys make the right decision to, I think, tack out pretty soon and clear your air. And then we'll have a quick look at, I think this is you guys.
Because we have the camera, we may be able to get a transit.
Yeah, did you? No, transits are important in 800 starts. So I think you guys swap sheets a little bit earlier. Yeah, and it can go either way. Sometimes I think as a helm, like on that final approach, sometimes it's nice having the jib sheet because if you feel like you're getting stuck head to wind, obviously the jib is what you want to pull. But it depends how much you can just shout in your cruiser to pull the jib on as well. So either you take the jib and then that frees up communication to talk about not getting stuck head to wind, or you just basically the only communication with your crew is then if they've got the jib sheet is just what they should be doing with the jib sheet.
How far past the gun do you hand over?
I bet it's sometimes before, so it's not. If we end up closer to the line, obviously we'll trigger a bit later, and it probably won't be till after we've started that we'll hand up the sheet. But it's basically once we're both out on the wire and guys come out, then I'll almost hand the sheet straight away to him. So sometimes that's the second pass and second fall. Yeah. So I'm not sure when you. So I think sometimes you end up with a little bit of leeward heel in general. Well, that's windward there, which is nice, and then go for the swap. Yeah, it is kind of difficult, but quite early.
It's like when we know
a good start, and then I think obviously Hugo's in a little bit early to be getting the sheet, getting the.
I think we did the kick on in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to get more on straight away because I think we were like the pin boat, so I felt like we could really just like bow down.
Yeah.
And then,
but I told him not to.
Yeah. I always kind of think that it's a weird thing to practice, but actually practicing putting the control lines on and off and getting in and out real quick to do it is a good thing. And getting up to boat speed and then just giving myself a bit of time to be like, right, now I need to do it, and then actually look at where all the ropes are shitty and stuff. Whereas I do think if we just triggered, then sometimes there's a knot of ropes and you just get that kind of rush of blood to head to do it immediately, and you're probably not going to make that much difference in a few boat lengths. So I'd always get up to boat speed and get your shoulders out and then think about it. So I'll save the video of the guys capsizing till last. It's always good to leave people with a good. I just wrote a few of the notes down, which I think is kind of interesting for how it is racing an 800 versus a 200 or another boat. So again, we kind of touched on this in the video. Always a little bit more windward heel. I always found the 800 just wants to get stuck head to wind, even compared to other skiffs. So a bit more windward heel if possible. One thing that makes quite a lot of kicker off, we talked about that. If you pull a kicker on, you'll either sail forward because the wind will just catch the sail, or you'll get stuck head to wind. And another side of that is the battens. So if you have your battens too tight, it'll take more force to pop them. And whilst you're sat there, it means the sails won't properly rag, and they'll always motor forward a little bit, especially if you have one popped a different way to the other, because it basically creates two little sails working against each other. So one thing we found is it's a lot easier basically to hold station with slightly less batten tension in the top battens. I think generally over time we've ended up with a little bit less batten tension anyway, partly because I get frustrated trying to pop them, and we lose more with me getting in a rage about the top batten not popping. But also actually I think there's probably plenty of depth in the top of the sail anyway, so you don't need to time put more in. So generally, if you do find yourselves either always having the battens pop the wrong way, or kind of slightly moving forward uncomfortably, then try a little bit less batten tension. We talked about when to pull the kicker on and the options about when to take sheets and stuff. One kind of like big difference of the 800 to how our approach starts to the 200 is that we will get the line bias. And sometimes I normally do that by sailing down the line one way, taking a compass reading, sailing back the other way, and then sometimes we'll do it on a tacking angle head up, and if you head up and it's not as big a head up compared to doing it the other way, then that means you're sailing towards the favoured end. But I often feel with 800s is it's very hard to realise a line advantage because you lose so much in attack. So if you're at the favoured end of the line, especially if it's a port end, even if the port end is 3 boat lengths ahead of the fleet, ahead of the pack, then you'll lose that in attack. So you never get to bank that advantage, and you often just get, even though your head get pinned to a side of the course. So what I tend to do thinking about starts is not worry about a few boat lengths of line advantage, but I worry more about what shift we're in, and that then helps me decide either what tack I'll start on. So you basically always want to start on the lifted tack, and I'd encourage more people to start on port more often because you lose so much in attack anyway that actually just starting, if people sail like from the favoured end, it's only favoured end because it's been headed, and they'll be sailing on the header then, and they'll be all locked into each other, whereas you start on port, you've saved probably like 3 or 4 boat lengths in the tack, you're sailing in clear air and you're sailing the lifted tack, basically without having to lose a tack to get there. So I'd concentrate more on sailing around pre-start, knowing your numbers for each tack, and then thinking about how you're going to be on that tack at the start of the race. And the flip side of that, maybe you don't always want to start on port because of whatever rights issues if it's a busy line, but then I'd always be thinking of starting to windward of the fleet so I can be the first one to tack and get onto lifted tack. And have options to go out the other way. And it feels weird because then you're often looking at a pin end line favour and you're often deliberately not then going to the pin end. But like days like today was a perfect example because the wind was shifting around like 20 degrees or more, and the line was probably about even, but depending on when you started would be a bit forward, a bit back. But it was mostly just on the shift phase, not a real big advantage.
And the line's like short as well.
Exactly. So I'd albeit get your transits and get your line bias, and know sometimes it's good to have in the back of your head. We always know if we want a 20-degree shift, then that means that end is now favoured without having to measure it up again. But mostly we're just thinking about where we are compared to the rest, so that we're into the first shift sooner.